All righty, we're gonna get started here. So thank you all so much for joining. If you don't know me already, my name is Kenny Dumez. I'm the DevRel lead here at Graphite. And this week has been so exciting. We have our CEO, Merrill Lutsky, here to give us a little talk on what's new with Git in 2024, how to get the most out of it, and kind of some history around Graphite and what we've been working on over the last couple months and couple years. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. This is kind of the culmination of our launch week this week. We've shipped so many amazing new features. And if you haven't been following along, we're going to give you a little recap at the end here. But thank you so much for joining, and we're going to go and dive right in. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll give Merrill his full attention here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kenny. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in. We're super excited about all the features that we've released over the past few days. And this is the first time that we're doing a live webinar talking about how you can get a bit more from Git in 2024. And really excited to go through some of the history of Git and other version control tools. We'll talk about kind of some of the things that you can do both with and without Graphite to get more out of version control. And then at the very end, we'll save some time for Q&A and a bit of recap of some of the great features that the team has been working on, has released over the past week. So really excited. Thank you all again for joining, and we'll dive right in. So as I said, a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll start by talking about a history of Git and version control. So a lot of the decisions that we've made in building Graphite and how we've crafted our tool today are based on almost 2 decades of feedback on previous version control tools. And we've studied these extensively. We spent a lot of time looking back at kind of where we came from in version control and using that to inform where we are today. Secondly, we'll talk about kind of this idea that developers deserve better than good enough. This is something that we strive for in just about everything that we put out at Graphite. We don't think that good enough is good enough. We really want to craft experiences that elevate developers and that really help you be more efficient and really enjoy a lot of the work that goes into creating great products. Third, we'll talk about kind of getting more from Git, some of the best practices both with and without Graphite. We'll go through some closing thoughts, a recap of our launch week, and then we'll save some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions, make sure to hang on to them, and you'll have plenty of time to ask them at the end. So with that, let's dive right in and go through a brief history of code review. So this is a really interesting graphic that kind of tracks the evolution of some of the different protocols. And again, I think it's really helpful to go through and look at where we came from in order to understand the context of version control today. So version control, as we know it, was actually invented at Bell Labs back in 1982 with SCCS, source code control system, is kind of thought of as the first ever like code version control system. And there are a few other evolutions on top of SCCS, like RCS. And then eventually this lineage kind of leads to SVN that many of you know. In parallel, there was also the development of BitKeeper, which initially was used by the Linux Foundation, and then eventually Linus created what we know as Git today, based on a lot of the ideas that BitKeeper established. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what each of these protocols introduced. So if we look ahead to the next slide, what's interesting is if you look at the evolution here. SCCS really wasn't a collaborative tool. It was very much just designed to solve the problem of if I'm iterating on a piece of code, how do I store my changes without having to store a copy of the entire file every single time? And that was really all that SCCS did. Branching was kind of the innovation that RCS introduced on top of that. And then it wasn't until CVS and SVN that you had the ideas of multiple developers collaborating. SVN was the first source control tool that introduced the idea of atomic commits. And then, but SVN I think was interesting in that it really it depended on always having a constant online connection to a centralized repository. That was the main idea of SVN, was that there is one trunk branch. It's in a central location, and anyone who's working on that is connecting to that central repository. You can lock files there to make sure that that you're not that someone else isn't modifying the same file at the same time. And obviously that was that worked very well for smaller repos, but quite difficult to handle when you have like hundreds of committers working on the same repo at the same time. And really, the why Git was so great in the beginning was that it had the entire repo history stored locally, and it was distributed. So many developers could work on the same project offline. You didn't have to all be connected to a central repo, and you didn't have like the many conflicts that would emerge from SVN. So excited to see the evolution from SCCS all the way to Git. And then it wasn't until GitHub in 2007 that we introduced the idea of pull requests. So pull requests really was the first that was the first kind of code review tool on a hosted platform. Previously, kind of the history of code review as we know it comes from the Linux Foundation, where commonly they would actually email back and forth patches and comment on email threads, and that was the first idea of code review as we know it. And GitHub kind of formalized that concept into pull requests in 2007, and have iterated on it a little bit since then. They did another release in 2012, but that was really where a lot of these innovations have come from. Alongside of that, there are also some particular version control systems for targeted use cases that are worth mentioning. So you have tools like Perforce, which develop primarily for gaming. For a lot of times for gaming, you need large files for assets, and they needed version control as well. They needed to be accessible to non-engineers, so Perforce kind of developed as a tool specifically for that use case. Although notably, Google has based their entire code review system on Perforce, so they have by far the largest instance of Perforce that's running. And then you also had companies like Facebook and Meta that developed tools for massive monorepos. So Facebook is kind of famous for really pushing forward the state of the art for monorepo tooling. They developed Mercurial based on SVN and a whole suite of tools around how you do fast operations on a monorepo, doing things like shallow cloning to make sure that you're not spending a massive amount of time every day just pulling and pushing your repo. So that's a quick idea of some of the innovations that were made for more targeted use cases. And if we look at kind of how this evolved in popularity, you can see that Git actually, although it's something that we think of as like deeply ingrained in the developer workflow today, it's actually not that old relatively. So Git really became the most popular version control system around 2014, according to the Eclipse Developer Survey. If you look at Stack Overflow for searches based on questions around Git, it was around 2010 that it became the most popular. And really, you can kind of trace the release of GitHub and the rise of Git are very much in lockstep with each other. So the two kind of enabled each other to become the predominant version control and code review system that we use today. And Git, I think a lot of what we can trace this to is that Git got a lot of things right. So one of the biggest things is there's a good separation between the porcelain commands that we interact with every day and some of the deeper plumbing commands for actually rewriting and rewriting the history. It was distributed, as I mentioned, so you can run most of the operations locally. It's a lot faster. You don't need to worry about always being connected to a central repository or worried about locked files that somebody else is editing. You can branch off of branches, which is a very cool and very intuitive part of Git, is that if you have a piece of work, it's very easy to then branch off of that branch to create a dependent branch. And this is kind of the basis of the stack changes workflow that's so core to Graphite that we'll talk about. Files were objects that have a unique SHA. Obviously, this is nice because then if the file changes, the SHA changes, and that gives you some really nice properties for working for how you construct the protocol. And then importantly, I think Git introduced the idea that you could go back with the reflog and look through and update the history. So SVN was very easy to mess up because it assumed that you were never going back and changing history. You didn't really have a lot of things that you could do if you messed something up. Versus Git, as long as you're comfortable diving into reflog, it's fairly easy for you to go back and restore an old version if you know what you're doing. And that's something that I think really helped Git become one of the more predominant, become the predominant version control tool that we use today. That said, though, Git also has its downsides, and a lot of things that make it difficult. That I'm sure, as someone who uses Git every day, I'm sure you're well aware of. It's quite difficult to master. I think every developer, myself included, was really confused by Git in the beginning. You end up like getting yourself in a bad state a ton. And really, in your day to day, you're only using a small fraction of the total body of Git commands. So it's very easy to kind of forget how to do the more complex operations if you're not refreshing yourself. And it's quite common that you can get yourself in a bad state and kind of need somebody who's more familiar with it to help you out of that. And in particular, I think state management is an area where it can get quite complex. So when you're syncing between your local machine and your remote, there's a lot that can go wrong with like potentially overwriting changes or someone else's. You can have issues where you have a lot of if you're writing a lot of changes, you can have a lot of branches that get stale really quickly, and you have to manually go through and do garbage collection. You can have challenges of even though you're able to keep your own copies locally. It can be if you have a long running feature branch, it can be quite difficult to make sure that your changes aren't conflicting with everyone else, especially if you have a ton of engineers working in one repo. And obviously, this introduces the potential for merge conflicts. You can have cases where on a large monorepo, especially where you're running CI on a particular change, and then by the time that all your CI goes green, somebody else has introduced another change, has already merged another change, which conflicts. And this is the type of thing that starts to get more difficult and starts to get exposed more, particularly as you have many engineers that are working in the same repo. So those are some of the downsides of Git. We'll also then talk about the same thing for GitHub. So GitHub is an amazing tool. It's enabled 100 million developers and more to collaborate on code. It's something that pretty much every developer gets started on when they're first learning to program. So it's really become a massive force in the development world, and enabled so much collaboration. But that said, I think if you look at GitHub, the core idea of it really is 16 years old. The workflow of creating a feature branch, writing all of your changes in one PR, putting that up for review, waiting for review to be unblocked, and then merging it in before you can start another change. That's something that really hasn't changed since GitHub introduced the PR. And in that time, I think what's so much has changed about development. So release cycles have gotten orders of magnitude shorter. You used to have releases that were happening on like a weekly or bi-weekly cadence, and now the best companies are releasing many, many times a day. And developers in the same time are writing more code than ever, especially with tools like Copilot, which increase developer output by something like 40% according to GitHub's metrics. You have so much more code that's being written now than ever before, and this is just putting so much more pressure on that core 16-year-old workflow to keep everyone unblocked and to keep your organization running. So it's definitely something that did a lot. It did a lot in the beginning to enable collaboration, but it's been difficult to scale with everything else that's been happening in the developer workflow. One of the big things here is that you can spend so much time. One of the key problems that arises here is that you spend so much time blocked on PRs. So with the GitHub workflow, you write your large change, and that PR can sit for days or even weeks waiting for a review. Particularly now, it was a little bit better when everyone was in an office together. You could just go over and bother somebody and until they gave you a review. But with today's world of many remote and even asynchronous teams, this is really, really painful. So we have many graphite users that have completely asynchronous teams where without a tool like graphite or without with the conventional workflow, they'd have to wait potentially an entire day before getting an approval from the right person in order to keep working on that work stream. So this is something that just hasn't really evolved with the way that we work. And then similarly, PRs can go through many rounds of feedback, especially if they're large. So imagine you have like a 24-hour wait time, then multiply that by every single cycle that you have to go through of changes requested and updates pushed, and it quickly becomes a problem. And similarly, large PRs are taxing on the reviewer side as well. So there's the meme that I'm sure everyone has seen about like the size of PRs and how that affects the quality of code review. This is something that we think about a lot, and that I think is really one of the bigger problems that's emerged with the GitHub workflow. So I think this brings us to one of the key tenets that we hold at Graphite is that developers really deserve better than good enough. We have this workflow that's really that has not changed for almost 2 decades now. It's good enough. It works for many teams, but it hasn't really been optimized, or it hasn't really been thoughtful of the best practices that have evolved alongside it in that time. And we think that there's a lot better that can be done. And the reason we think this is because companies have done it already. So if you look at tools like Critique at Google or Fabricator at Meta, there are already internal tools that are orders of magnitude better than the workflow that GitHub pioneered in the beginning for the fastest moving teams that want to ship quickly, that want to keep all of their engineers unblocked. And we'll talk a little bit about what makes these tools so great. The main innovation here is this idea called stacking. So the stacking workflow, basically the idea here is parallelizing review and development. So as an author, you're never blocked waiting for a reviewer. And as a reviewer, you're never handed like a multi-thousand line PR and have to somehow figure out like, where do you even start reviewing this? To contrast these, these are 2 diagrams kind of showing how the workflows differ. On the left-hand side, we have kind of the conventional PR workflow where it's very much done in series. You create a change, you have to wait for review, you get it approved, you merge it. Then if you want to create a change that was dependent on that first change, you have to wait for that entire cycle to complete first. Versus the stack changes workflow, which Google and Meta both kind of figured out in parallel, was that you don't need to necessarily have review be blocking. If you just give engineers tools that help them break up changes into smaller atomic pieces, you can basically let them keep working on dependent changes, as long as the tooling then helps them go back and propagate those changes further down through all the other changes that they've made. So that's really the core innovation that Google and Meta figured out here and built into their internal tools. And in fact, that innovation was so strong, that when we started Graphite, we were actually working on a totally different idea in developer tools. It was like a mobile release product that didn't get as much traction as we wanted. But what was interesting was that we hired some engineers who are from both of those companies, and quickly they realized that when they started to use GitHub, they hadn't used it before. They quickly found that it wasn't anywhere near what they were used to. One of our engineers in the beginning said something like, "Wow, using code review on GitHub really makes me feel like a caveman compared to Fabricator." And that was really something that that I think stood out to us and really made us think about like what was going on here. And we actually built the first version of Graphite just as kind of a hackathon project internally for a few engineers to be able to think about to use stack changes on top of GitHub and get this workflow back that they so dearly miss. And that was really the beginning of Graphite. We never really intended it to become like a full company back then. It really was just a tool that was designed to unblock us internally. But a couple things kind of happened to inspire us to consider making it into more than that. One of them was that Fabricator, the open source spinout of Meta's internal tool, stopped being maintained in 2021. And this caused a lot of stir, particularly among ex-Facebook engineers who were wondering kind of how they could use stack changes without having to without having to move everything over to GitHub or to other tools. And Fabricator obviously was a great tool and has inspired a lot of what we think about at Graphite. And this was something that really made us pay attention and think about how can somebody could the tool that we've built internally potentially fill that gap and help companies work in this way that they're no longer able to with Fabricator not being maintained anymore. So that was one of the main pieces. The other one was what we called the Greg case study. So when we initially built Graphite internally, my co-founder and our CTO Greg was actually quite hesitant about Graphite and about stack changes. He came primarily from Airbnb, where this wasn't really a workflow that was commonly used. And initially was kind of resistant to changing the way that he thought about code review. I think one of the common things that we hear from Graphite users is that it's kind of hard to think about completely changing your source control workflow in the beginning, and it takes a little bit to wrap your head around the benefits of Graphite. This is something that we're working on quite a bit, by the way, and we'll talk about that at the end. But Greg in the beginning was very much in that camp. Until he really noticed how quickly engineers using Graphite were shipping code. That was really I think the thing that opened his eyes to it, is that he saw kind of how productive it was helping a few of our engineers be. He tried it for a few days and really quickly saw the value, and he's been like a diehard stacker ever since. So that really, seeing him, make that shift and the benefits that it gave to him really helped to convince him of the benefits of this, and also was kind of one of the things that made us think maybe we should share this a little bit more broadly than just within the Graphite team. So from there, the quick story that we'll share here is, obviously Graphite started as an internal tool. We sent it out to a bunch of ex-Facebookers in our network and friends at startups that we knew, and really quickly the feedback around it became so overwhelmingly positive that it really pushed us to think about focusing the entire company on this, and that was really that was the thing that really pushed us over the edge and made it and got us so excited. It was just hearing how excited everyone else that we shared this tool, that we really hadn't designed to be more than something that we were using internally, was about it, and pushed us to eventually introduce Graphite as like a private beta, launched the waitlist back in like November of 2021. And then ultimately, I think it's really the excitement and all the great feedback that we received from users since then, that's kept pushing us to scale it up to the point now where Graphite is used every day at amazing companies like Ramp, Asana, Chime, and many more of the fastest moving engineering organizations today. And one of the things we wanted to tell you a little bit more about this and share a bit of a story of kind of how Graphite grew at one of the companies that we really look up to the most, which is actually a fellow New York startup over in Williamsburg, the browser company. So we're super excited to have Andrew Munches from the browser company talk a little bit about the story of Graphite, how they discovered it in the beginning, and then how it's kind of spread and helped within their engineering organization. So without further ado, we'll share a quick story from Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Monchizadeh, a software engineer here at the Browser Company. We're building a new web browser called Arc. Arc is designed to bring the internet to you. Our team of designers, storytellers, and engineers had developed Arc to reduce tab anxiety and to improve the way we all use the internet. If you'd like to learn more or to try Arc, please visit arc.net. As an experienced team, we understand that experimentation and iteration are core to a successful product, and that building a high quality web browser is incredibly challenging. In order to build that high quality web browser, we have become increasingly focused on reducing the time it takes to iterate on our experiments. So any product or tool or process that can make it faster to go from idea to development to testing to out in our members' hands is incredibly exciting to us. In the beginning, like many small teams, the browser company used GitHub as the code review tool. However, a number of our engineers are experienced with more advanced code review techniques, like stack changes. Before Graphite, in order to use stack changes, our engineers would either have to manually handle rebasing their dependent Git branches, or writing a wrapper script for doing that, or they would have to create monolithic PRs that were intended to be reviewed commit by commit. None of these are very comfortable solutions because the GitHub UI does not really encourage either dependent branches or commit by commit PR review. Eventually, a number of these engineers discovered Graphite and began experimenting with it. They were interested to see if it could actually improve the stacked changes approach on GitHub. They were excited to learn that it had an improved CLI than most of their or any of their custom wrappers, and they really enjoyed the new, different take on a code review UI. This group of engineers did find that they were merging code faster because they were able to get faster code review. Their changes were smaller and easier to digest by their peers. They began to share this with the rest of the team via presentations and documentation, and more of the team has been adopting it over time. As our team has increased adoption, we've actually found that overall everyone is getting faster merges, and our experimentation has gone up because we are not waiting on slow code review for huge changes. Throughout this whole process, the Graphite team has been wonderful to work with. They've been open and communicative about new features and improvements. They've been really open to our feedback as they have shipped those new features. We've been really excited about features such as the Slack app, which is a massive improvement over the GitHub app, especially regarding the notification messages. And we've excited about automations and the ability for individual engineers to stay more engaged with changes that are happening in the repo. And finally, most recently, they've released a Visual Studio Code extension for managing branches that is going to be a wonderful addition for our multi-platform engineers. As we have more and more engineers working across Windows and Mac OS, having a unified tool across both platforms will make it more comfortable and easier to switch between them. We look forward to continued collaboration with the Graphite team and are excited for all the new features they are releasing next.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Andrew for that quick note on Graphite. We're really grateful to him and to all of the folks at the browser company that have been using Graphite since some of the very earliest days of our closed beta, and have given us amazing feedback in that time. We're all very big fans of Arc and the work that the browser company is doing. So thank you very much to Andrew for volunteering to speak on our webinar. With that, we'll get into kind of the heart of what I wanted to talk about today, which is getting more from Git. And what I'll talk about a few best practices and some of the ideas that we think are really key to getting the most out of your version control system in 2024, and a little bit about how you can do that both with and without Graphite. So the first of these best practices, obviously, we're a little biased here, but is stacking your changes. We really think that stacking is one of the most powerful things that you can do with Git, and is actually something that is very natural to Git as it was originally implemented. So the idea of branching off of branches is something that Git supports really well. It's also one thing that many beginning developers will reach for in the beginning when they want to create features that depend on that depend on previous work. And it's only really due to the way that GitHub handles converts branches to PRs that this isn't a more common workflow. It's possible, in Git, obviously, it's possible to stack your changes and branch off of branches. You can do this with Git. You can do this. It's particularly helpful if you're rebasing your branches as you go. But even this becomes a little bit tedious as you start to stack more and more branches. Every single time you make a change, you have to go through and rebase each branch that you've stacked on top of it. And that just becomes, particularly when you get to working with like 10 or 20, or I think one of the engineers on our team had a stack of 66 changes recently. So when you get to that scale, going through and doing that rebase manually every single time becomes quite difficult. The other challenge here, as I mentioned, is that GitHub doesn't really support this natively. So when you push a PR that's in a stack, there's no good way to manage those dependencies in GitHub. And you really have to just add a note in. A lot of times what teams will do that aren't using a tool here is they'll just add a note manually in the description to say, hey, don't merge this PR until this previous PR has merged. And obviously this can work for a little bit, but it's not really scalable. You really need a tool that will enforce the relationships and make sure that that dependency graph is respected. So that's really one of the core things that you can do. Obviously, this is the core of what we built at Graphite, with both the Graphite CLI and with our new VS Code extension, which we just released this week. We make working with stack changes super easy. So the idea here is that you can, as you're going, you can easily create small changes. You can stack them on top of each other. With the VS Code extension, you can now do things like drag and drop branches to rearrange them and restack them, much the same that you would have done with the move command in the CLI. So we want to make sure that stacking is really easy to do with Graphite, and providing a layer on top of Git that just enables this really powerful workflow. So that's stacking. Next, we'll talk about squashing branches on merge, and this one is a little bit. This one can be a little bit controversial. There are a lot of opinions about this, and at Graphite here, we really believe that squashing branches the squashing branches on merge is the right approach. So obviously, when you look post merge. Within a branch, it's less important to capture it. If you assume that the branch itself captures kind of one atomic change that you wanted to make, it's less important as you're going to look back that all the various checkpoints and commits are captured. What's really important is that you have like a clean history that shows exactly the change that was made. In particular, one of the more common arguments and something that we see in practice is that if you have a lot of commits that aren't intended to be reviewed along the way, it's very easy for someone else to go back and accidentally revert to a commit that didn't build or that wasn't intended to stand alone in production. And this is something that we see happen quite a lot in practice. And one of the reasons that we recommend squashing branches on merge is just to make sure that you have that clean revertibility. The nice thing about stack changes is that in many cases, if you're just writing with one commit per branch, you don't actually have to think about this as something that something to be mindful of. You'll just have the idea of like every single branch and every single commit is something that's intended to go to prod, that's intended to pass CI, and hopefully is a small enough change that can be reviewed nicely. So squashing branches on merge is one of the practices that we see, particularly teams with large monorepos having more success with, and something that we recommend here. Next up, similarly, and I alluded to this in the previous one, is making one commit per branch. So a lot of this goes back to the idea that again, that every single piece that you review, should be an atomic change. Every single piece of code that you put up for review should be an atomic change, and that change should really be small, reviewable, and also should be atomic. So the idea here, we see that sometimes we hear folks that think about reviewing commit by commit. GitHub has some support for looking at kind of every single commit checkpoint. But you can easily map this concept to reviewing branch by branch if you just think about it as like every branch every branch is like that atomic piece that you'd want to have reviewed. And if you think about it in that way, you're just basically mapping the same concept to like one level up of abstraction. The workflow can be exactly the same, but you get all the benefits of being able to like review and give an opinion, have your reviewers give an opinion on every single one of those checkpoints, and make sure that each of those are captured in the history. So one commit per branch is something. This is something that we do at Graphite. This is something that we recommend, particularly for teams that are stacking. Up next is a significantly less controversial one: avoiding long-lived feature branches. So feature branches at this point are pretty much an anti-pattern. If you have a PR that's open for more than 1 to 2 weeks, especially if your team is moving at all quickly, it's pretty much worthless. Your local branches, any local branches that are running longer than that, you're just going to run into a lot of conflicts. You're going to do a lot of work to constantly pull in changes and resolve conflicts. It doesn't really make sense to have branches that are long lived. It's a large cause of bugs and conflicts, and it's something that really doesn't make sense. Similarly, local branches. If you have local branches that are older than a month, you should probably just delete them. Again, they're at that point they're kind of out of date to the point where you're likely to run into a lot of conflicts when you're merging them in. So this is like a pretty uncontroversial one, and one that Graphite helps out with a lot. If you run GT sync, one of the nice things that we do is automatically suggest deleting any branch that's been merged in already, or that's older than a certain time. So Graphite really helps you avoid long-lived branches, and the idea of stacking at its core really emphasizes small atomic changes. Moving on, force pushing is another kind of controversial topic at times. Our view on this is that force pushing is fine as long as your tooling supports it. A lot of what's difficult about force pushing is you can potentially overwrite someone else's changes. This is something that Graphite is really mindful of, in that we'll warn on force push when there are changes that have diverged. This is really important when you're collaborating with another author on a particular PR. And then the other piece is comments. So when you force push, one of the biggest problems in GitHub today is that it's easy to blow away comments that a reviewer has left on a previous version. And Graphite is designed to handle this well, and actually preserve those comments and move them over to the latest version as best as possible. So this is something that I think force pushing is not necessarily a bad thing as long as you have tooling that supports it. And tooling like Graphite, I think, can help you use more of a rebase-centric workflow like stacking more efficiently in your everyday. Up next is an interesting one that Graphite makes easy, which is editing your code before creating a branch. So a lot of times in the beginning, we've all kind of been taught to create your branch first, then make your changes, then make your commit. And really, it's kind of an extra step of mental overhead to think about, okay, I'm going to create this branch, I'm going to create commits on it. Whereas in reality, I think the most efficient way to think about this is, you're starting your work from usually from your trunk branch or from the branch that you're on. You'll write your changes, and then once you feel like they're in a state where they're ready to be reviewed, then you can go ahead and actually create that change. And this is sort of inspired by the Mercurial diff workflow, where you think about just writing your changes and then creating the diff that you want to actually have reviewed. So this is one of the core. This is kind of a core idea of Graphite. Obviously, we support the other way around as well, but we really think that it's kind of a level of abstraction that you don't need to think about. And if you can get, a lot of us obviously have that like first create a branch like deeply ingrained, but if you can get around that and start to think about it in terms of creating the branch when you're ready to have a piece reviewed, it's something that can save you a lot of time and mental overhead. Speeding up code review. This is something that we talk a lot about at Graphite. We've spent a lot of time investing in features to help with this. So one of the core ideas here is that nits really shouldn't be blocking. They shouldn't kind of require another review cycle of changes. And the way that we think about this at Graphite is they really should be code suggestions. If you have a suggestion that that you can go ahead and add, it makes it super easy for the author to then accept those, commit them, and then be ready to merge their change. One of the things that we do and that we released this week that I'm super excited about is AI code suggestions. So the idea here is that instead of just writing a comment, let's say that you want to ask the author to rename a variable or follow a style guide. Previously, you would have typed that out in English, added that comment, and then the author would have to go back, make the change, re-request review, and then you'd have to approve again. With AI code suggestions now, what you can do is type your comment in plain English, just click the magic wand code suggestion button, and Graphite will automatically convert it from your comment to a code suggestion that you can add to your review and that the author can accept with one click. So it really cuts down on the cycle time and the back and forth required to make what would be a small change. And it makes sure that nit isn't something that holds up merging that PR any longer than it needs to. This is something that we're really excited to share for any organizations that on Graphite that haven't disabled our AI features. This is something that's now available for you guys to try, as of a couple days ago. Up next, obviously, one of the core ideas of stacking is shipping smaller pull requests. And why I think sometimes folks will ask, well, what's so great about small pull requests? And obviously, there's the benefit to the author where nobody wants to read a 500 plus line PR. But if you look at the data, and one of the really cool things that we get to do at Graphite is to look at in aggregate kind of how look at all the data that we have around how different companies are working and what kind of influences how quickly a PR is reviewed and merged. So one of the coolest things that we've looked at here is how the size of a PR actually affects the time to merge. And what you can see here is that it actually has the trend that you'd expect, where as the size of the PR grows, you can really see the increase in time that it takes for that PR to get merged. So the smallest PRs in this chart are almost 5 times faster to merge at the median than like 2,000 line plus PRs here. And interestingly, you see as on the far right of this chart, as you get to like the really big changes, they start getting faster again, likely because these are just refactors, lots of generated code, package additions, or just laziness on the side of reviewers, just giving the classic LGTM. And this is something you can really implement for yourself. So both as with and without Graphite, in your organization, looking at time to merge, looking at the size of changes that you're writing, the size of PRs that you're putting up, this is something that you can have a lot of control over. So obviously Graphite's Insights tool makes this really easy to see things like your median time to merge and your median PR size. And this is something where you can look at and track as kind of an SLO with your team. You can also do things like prevent or automatically comment on large PRs to nudge reviewers, to nudge authors to split up their changes. Graphite's automations that we released this week makes this really easy to automatically add a comment based on certain attributes. And this is one that we're going to be shipping soon, is actually just size of PR. And these are something that you can track week over week or even sprint over sprint with your team. Finally, staying on top of notifications. So this is something that a lot of engineers that we talk to have mentioned. Notifications are something that I think all of us struggle with, weighing the balance between just getting the massive fire hose of notifications and constantly being interrupted by anything that's happened on any PR that you're at all associated with, versus putting everything on silent and then potentially missing like an important review or missing the opportunity to unblock your PR. So thinking at Graphite here, we really think about increasing that signal to noise ratio with dedicated tooling. Obviously, we've had our PR inbox from the very beginning that helps you set up kind of custom inboxes and custom filters for what you want to pay attention to. We have our great Slack bot that helps you review small PRs in line and stay on top of only actionable notifications where your action is needed to unblock somebody else or to unblock your own PR. And then just this week, we announced the GA release of our Mac menu bar app. So you can kind of always have your PR inbox accessible from your desktop wherever you go. And this is something that we think really helps out with with staying on top of notifications and finding kind of that balance that works for you. So that's it for our advice on how to get the most out of Git in 2024. A lot of great best practices there that we've seen work at Graphite. We've seen this work at companies like Asana and Ramp, and some of the largest users of Graphite out there. So really excited to share these all, and hope that these are if you can take even just one of these things and implement it to some extent in your org, we think that it's something that'll really help benefit your engineering team and help make code review less of a chore and more of something that that helps to accelerate and unblock everyone's great work. With that, we'll speak a little bit about a quick recap of launch week. So on Tuesday, we started off with our theme of accelerating code review. We talked about automations, helping you to automatically take actions like assigning reviewers, adding labels, commenting on PRs, notifying you of PRs that match certain configurations, and tools that really help you to work faster. We talked about our menu bar app. We talked about AI code suggestions as well, and some of the great tooling that we've built to make code review faster. On Wednesday, then, we talked about making stacking seamless. So bringing the stacking is the core of what we do, bringing the stack front and center to the Graphite experience with tools like Stack Edit, a brand new interface for creating and updating stacks of changes all at once, and taking bulk actions on all the PRs in your stack. We also talked about like how we bring the stack front and center in the PR page now, so you can easily see any other related PRs and make sure that you're getting the full context for a change that you're reviewing. Yesterday, then, we talked about stacking with the tools you love and introduced our fantastic new VS Code extension. So you can visually create and update stacks without ever having to leave your IDE. And then finally today, we talked a bit about what's next for Graphite in some of our blog posts and tweets earlier. So really excited by all these features. We can't wait to see how you use these on your team. And we hope that you'll check out some of these great launches that the team has been working so hard on over the past week. So thank you all for tuning in to launch week, and excited to hopefully get these in your hands and see what you do with them. Finally, a couple last things before opening it up to questions. A quick preview of something we're really excited about here. Later this spring, we're going to be releasing our first ever State of Code Review report. Like I mentioned in some of the best practices, we have some amazing data here at Graphite on how different teams use code review, how they collaborate, what are some of the best practices that help teams be more efficient when it comes to code review. And we're super excited. We've been spending a lot of time digging into those insights, and we can't wait to share so much of what we've learned with you in this first State of Code Review report later this spring. And then one last ask from us is Graphite. One thing that we're really excited about was, obviously we did our launch on Product Hunt earlier this year. We had a ton of amazing support from our community and from folks that were excited, and actually so much so that we've now been nominated for the Dev Tool of the Year award for Product Hunt for 2023. So we really need your help to help Graphite win the Dev Tool of the Year. If you have a moment later today, we'd really love it for you. Particularly if you enjoyed what you heard today, we'd love for your support in the Dev Tool of the Year voting. Voting closes Sunday, so really appreciate anything if you have a minute to go and support Graphite in that. And I think it'd be a great honor, and I think would really recognize the great work that the team has put in if we could take this home. And with that, that is the end of the webinar. We'd love to open the floor to a few minutes of questions that Kenny can help moderate. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. This was the first time that we're doing this, so very much like iterating on the format, and would love both questions and then feel free to email us afterwards with any feedback or advice for how we can improve these in the future. But thank you so much for your support of Graphite and for tuning in today. We really hope that this was something that you learned a lot from and can take home some great best practices for your team going forward. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kenny.
Yeah, thank you so much, Merrill. This is a great presentation. I certainly learned a lot. And thank you for everyone else for tuning in. We got a few minutes for Q&A. So we're going to take it from the beginning. We got some questions here. We got a question that was, what was the Graphite team working on before it was deciding to shift the company's focus to work on the code review product as the main focus? Are there any other products and tools from the Graphite team we can keep an eye out for and support?
It's a great question. So before we were building Graphite, we were building a mobile release and rollback platform. So the idea was that for web deployments, it's pretty easy if something goes wrong to roll back really quickly. What we were building back then, which was called Screenplay, was basically a build tool that would take your most recent app version, native iOS app version, and previous one, and package them together with a feature flag, so that if something went wrong when you released your app, you could roll everyone's devices back to the previous version of the app on device without having to resubmit through the App Store and wait potentially days for a hotfix build to be approved by Apple and go out. This was obviously it was a super interesting technical challenge. We spent far too much time like decompiling and recompiling Apple binaries and doing all sorts of things that we definitely weren't supposed to be doing there. But ultimately, it was just a very difficult, it was a very difficult technical challenge, and a very unstable surface to be building on, and also one where for mobile teams, we'd release something, you'd release something maybe once every 2 weeks, and you only really get one shot to get that right. So ultimately, was a pretty difficult product to build, especially for a team of our size, and but was something that was very interesting. And there are companies like Railway, I think it's Runway that are now doing similar things, and it's interesting to kind of see how they've evolved since then.
Yeah, and this next question is I'm going to combine two of them because they're fairly similar.
Sure.
So when stacking changes, how do you determine when to add to a previous stack diff or when to create an entirely new stack? What are some good rules of thumb for what determines or warrants dependent changes? And then right along with that, someone asked, we have Denise Lee asked, what do you do about large changes that are hard to break up? We've done big code mobs that are lower risk, but still worth reviewing, and large scale refactors that can touch hundreds of files. So I guess it's like, how do you break up these changes, and what are some best practices for breaking up these large changes into multiple stacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you're interested in learning more from this, one of our engineers, Dave Bradford, actually wrote up a blog post, which Kenny, you can link in the chat here, that details like a lot of different strategies for how to think about it. One common thing that we see is breaking up by surface that the change is touching. So let's say that you have like a backend change, an API change, and front end changes. You can think of it; those are like easy layers of abstraction where you can break up each change into a stack. We also see even like more granular changes, like if you're adding a React component, you can add each component even could be its own change. Basically, any time that you have a piece of logic or functionality that can stand on its own atomically, that really is when you should be breaking up a change. We see many engineers that are writing stacks of 50 plus changes at once, but each change itself can only needs to be sometimes like 10 or 20 lines. And that actually ends up being the best for reviewers, because there's nothing better than reviewing a 10 or 20 line change really quickly. And with our Slack integration in particular, they can review that even on the fly. So that's something that we recommend. To your point around large changes, stacking is a great strategy for the vast majority of changes, but it's not a be all end all. And in many cases, if you do have like a large refactor or something with a lot of generated files, like it's not necessarily, you don't always have to stack. And that's something that we're working on really supporting well. One thing that we're planning to work on in Graphite in the next couple of quarters is a better view of large changes, and one that kind of breaks it up into like summaries of the key things that are happening, and not necessarily having to expand every single file, but giving you as a reviewer a good overview of what's happening. So that's something that we're excited about working on soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll try to find that resource and link it in the chat. And then we have another question from Tyler, who says, would love to hear more about how you're thinking about upcoming support for more flows, particularly integration branches, where you merge to a particular branch rather than to trunk. This is one of the larger issues for our team. We do these sort of integration branches frequently as a new feature is being built. We don't have a robust feature flagging system. Also, schema changes can make flagging systems difficult.
Great question. Thank you for asking about that. I'm really glad you did, because it's actually something that we're thinking about quite a bit here. So you're certainly not the only person to ask about this. We actually are testing some better support for merging into different branches internally. So we just did a test the other day where we changed our trunk branch internally at Graphite to something else to play around with, supporting like multiple trunks and workflows like integration branches. So this is something that you can expect to see some updates coming pretty soon to the CLI to support, and to the VS Code extension as well. And then later on, we're also planning to follow up with changes to the dashboard, and also to tools like the merge queue to better support this. So very much something that we're thinking about, and we'll have more to share here soon.
Great. And that takes us about right to time. So again, thank you all so much for joining. This was our like Merrill said, our first ever webinar. So we're still working out some of the kinks, but yeah, thank you. And look forward to more of these coming in the future.
Yeah.
And Merrill, any last closing things to add?
Yeah, no, thank you, Kenny, for doing an amazing job moderating and organizing all of launch week. Big shout out to the Graphite team for all the hard work that they put into bringing you all these great features over the past week. And above all, thank you to everyone who tuned in. We're really happy to see the response to our first ever webinar, and we hope that this is something that you enjoyed and that we can do more of again soon. So. As always, feedback is one of the things that's helped us from the very beginning of Graphite. So would love any suggestions that you have for both for the product and the features that we've launched this week, and for the webinar in this format. So looking forward to hearing from you soon, and hopefully excited to join you again on another one of these for some more amazing features of Graphite in the near future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Everyone have a good weekend.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
all.